So let me give you a complete list of how it goes. So any .NET application, right? So you have any .NET application of type like web or Windows or console or any type, right? If we want to connect to database, then it has to go through ADO database access, right? Where there will be many classes. And again, you have database of different types. Right? So for whenever we say ADO, right? So we have uh, all the namespaces which we have for different databases, and mainly we set different steps to connect. So today we'll see each class where we can actually connect database. Okay? So let me create a let's say, right. So if you remember, we have created few, a table called college. So I tried to add a few more rows. I just kept it ready. So we added Sam on our previous class, right? So there is one more record added, right? And there is a select statement and a quest statement which kept it ready to actually use these queries in our program. So anyways, so which means we have a database ready and we have data entered. Now let's write a program and see how we can actually get that in our .NET. So here, so we have to follow the steps again, right? Let's see each and every step and write a program as such. So in our first step, we said we have to use a driver manager layer, which means loading a driver. Now, when we say loading a driver, so as we have chose SQL Server as a source, right, as a data source, which means we will have to load something called classes or the drivers or the libraries which supports SQL Server communication. So let me remove all the unwanted things. So here I can say system dot data dot, you can see whatever we have seen, right? You can see everything here, which is SQL client, right, which comes under system.data namespace. Now, SQL client is a namespace where you will have all the classes which are required to connect to SQL Server, SQL Server. Right? So this part is something which gives you loading a driver, which means we have imported a namespace. Now, the next step is to create a connection. Now, before creating any connection, right, it is very important to have a connection string. Now, this connection string mainly contains, if you remember, we had a discussion on this, we need a host, we need a database, right? We need credentials. Now, these credentials can be either, there are different type of credentials which we have in, not different types, there are two types of credentials which you can actually create in SQL Server. One is SQL Server authentication or Windows authentication, right? So whenever you just try to log into any server, right? Let's say this is my server, right? This is my server which I am using, right? So you can see here authentication mode, which one you want. Either you want it to be authentication of Windows or a SQL Server. Right, you can actually select either one. Now, Windows is something like you are actually giving it as an integrated authentication. So, with the user, whatever user you are actually running your application, right? So that user will have a direct access to database. That's a user authentication. Let's say. And SQL authentication is something where you have to provide a login and user ID and password for that. Right? So obviously, as I have this in my direct access to my Windows authentication mode, right? So I'm gonna select Windows authentication, and we'll see how to actually use this Windows authentication in my program. Also, if you want to create a SQL Server authentication, then you can actually create that. So in a database, right, you have uh, under your server, you also have something called security, right? In databases folder, we created a database, college, right? But if you want to go with the SQL Server authentication, you also have that. So in a security, you can see you have something called logins, right? Under logins, normally you will have every user created. It can be SQL or a Windows, right? You have all the options to create a login. So after your installation, if you actually want to test your SQL authentication, yes, you can actually right click on this and create a new login, right? And when you try to create a new login, then you have two options: either Windows authentication and SQL. When you select on SQL, you can give your own username, right? Login, password. And if you want to enforce it, you can enforce. Normally, you don't enforce, but normally, if it's a live user, you enforce it to change login internally, right? You can give, and then you can actually go to server roles and give any server role as such. And if that server is niche and admin, you can use sysadmin. So sysadmin will have access to everything, right? Or you can give some public, which means you can actually query and all that. So this is your window to create your logins. It can be Windows or a SQL application. Now you may get one issue here. Now whenever you're installing your SQL Server, right? So you may have selected, we have to, while installation of SQL Server, you have to follow some steps where you have selected single authentication mode. Now that single authentication mode is nothing but your Windows authentication. But you should select, if you feel that you will be using both authentication types, like Windows and SQL authentication, then you have to select accordingly and normally do select things, right? So if by mistake or by chance you install single authentication mode and you want multiple authentication, you can change it anyway, anytime. So select your server and go to properties in your editor, right? So here you have something called security. So in security you can see here, right? So if you can see, even I installed my SQL Server in a Windows authentication mode. Why? Because I know that I never, I'll never have to make my SQL Server in a multiple authentication modes like both SQL and Windows, because I'm not going to give any user, because my machine is not a server, right? So that's the reason why I created only one authentication mode called Windows. But if you want, you can actually have a SQL Server also authentication mode and click on OK. Then your server will be enabled for both. So if your server is enabled for both, then only you can create your SQL authentication. Otherwise, it will give you an error. Fine. So, so that is one main thing for credentials, right? And a host is nothing but a server name here, right? The complete server name and the instance, your SQL Server instance. So this here you can see, like Srinath Vivo is your server, right? Which is my, when I say server, it's a machine name, and your SQL Server node or SQL Server instance is your MSS SQL 2000. So this is a SQL Server instance, right? So we'll have to use the complete name for our host, right? And database is nothing but a database called college, right? And the credentials we just discussed on, which means we are ready to go with creating a connection. So let's see how to create a connection string. Now, very important thing while writing a database program or SQL connections or anything, right? As we discussed, it's very important to start with exception handling. Right? Now, for connecting, the first one is create connection. Right? So for connecting, we have something called class, which is SQL connection. Now you can see this is a class under your system.data.sql client where I can connect to my database. Right? Let me call it as con, which is a connection object, is equal to new. Now you can see here, whenever you create a SQL connection, now it is an overridable constructor which we got. Now here you have a direct SQL connection, you can create a direct object, or you can see here, you can either give a connection string as an input to this, right? Or you have connection string and the SQL credentials, or you don't have to actually give SQL credentials, in a separate, as a separate. You can actually, provide them as a part of your connection string. Right? Now let me create, without any constructor SQL connection created. So before that, let me create a connection string. Let me call it as connection string here. Now, building a connection string is very simple as such. So it completely contains a key value pair, right, where we will have to provide actual details of whatever we're giving, right? So to start with connection string, the first one which we have to give is a host, right, which we normally call as a data source. Data source is the one which specifies or which makes class of function understands that okay, this is a host. Now let me give this name. So let me go to properties and copy that name. And right. So with this, I gave the complete my host and the SQL Server instance. Now this is my data source. Now whenever it actually gets this data source, right, it knows that it should go to this server. Now obviously whenever my it starts searching the server, obviously my local machine is the same server, which means it will directly access my local server, and then it will search for this instance of SQL Server, and it will get it because it is installed in my machine, right? And you can see we are again getting this sequence, so make it at the rate. Now, once it is done, the second one which we have to give is database, right? So for providing database, the key value pair is we have something called initial catalog. So initial catalog, as what's the database name we use college. So let me just copy that and you can use college. So initial catalog is nothing but your database name, right? And then we have to give credentials. So as I'm going to use my Windows authentication mode, you can say integrated security. It's very important to follow the right. We have integrated security as SSPI, where it will actually specify that we are going to use integrated security with the username or the actual user we are running this application. We'll have a direct Windows authentication access to that SQL Server. So this is a connection string which we have. Now let's go ahead and actually provide this connection string to my SQL connection class. Now you can have you have something called connection string. can see there's a property. Now either you can give a connection string in this property, or as I said, you can actually mention that here it's connection string, you can directly give here. Okay. Let's give it here. Now with this, my connection string and the SQL class is SQL connection class is ready. Now we are ready to connect. Now in order to connect database, we have an internal method in SQL connection class called open. Now this will give us whether the database connection is, this open method will actually connect to the database. Okay. Now here, before going to any other right, let's first check whether my database connection is successful or not. Okay. So let me just say we have an internal thing called state. So here you can see you can actually check your state of your connection object. With different enum types. You can see broken, right, closed, connecting, executing, fetching, or open. Right? Now, which means we just connected. Now obviously you will have different states of a connection at different situations, right? Whenever you start executing your command, any query, right, then obviously it will be in executing mode, and maybe you will have to check with this. Right? So for now, as we have actually connected, let's check whether it is connected. Okay. So here let me write write line of connection with server. Right? So here I missed W and I should change this, right? So else I have try to run the server and connection so this will actually give me whether the connection is successful or not. Now it's very important that whenever we say if anything goes wrong, now even if you miss some spelling, right, even that may cause some problem, right? So don't worry about these connection strings because you will find it online, or the provider whosoever you're actually working, right, he'll actually give you the actual connection string which you can use, where you have to provide the actual details of what is the server, what is the database name, and if there are credentials, right, or integrated security, you have to provide those details, right? That's how it works. Now let us run this. First, let me make it as a startup project. Let me save this. Okay, now there was a problem. It seems let me put a breakpoint here. Not here. Now let me check. This is my connection string where I have a data source, so initial catalog, so integrated security. I missed it. When you see integrated security, it's not this. Right? That's what I use. I hope. So, now you can see the state open. Now the connection is already successful. Now this connection, right, is the one which actually not connected to the server which I am using I've installed in this. Now same way, if you have any remote machine, right, where your network is authenticated to connect to that database, right? Then you can actually use that server name and the database and all the security parameters to connect to the database. Now, so this is how we actually connect to the database. Now, anyways, just initially we got some error, right? We missed writing connections in a right way, so we actually missed it. Now let's see how we can actually cast. Now that's the reason why it's in. If you remember, it was very important. Previously we missed one thing in our connection. What is that? Whenever you open any connection, it's very important to make sure that we have to close the connection. Otherwise, the performance it will be huge, and the traffic will be locked. Right? So normally, how do we do that? It's important. So whenever you are creating any connection object, right? Always create that. I mean, before you try, create a variable of connection, and you can actually create your connection inside your try. And in that try region, always try to have a finally, right? So here, check whether your connection object is not equal to null, right? Because I mean, even before instantiating your connection, something may happen, and your program may be get killed. In that situation, the con object will always be null. That's the reason why we have to check whether my SQL connection object con is null or not. If it is not null, then I would say how to close the connection. It's very simple. In your SQL connection class, we have internal method called close. Close will actually close the complete connection. Now this is the best way to program the sequence. And here you can see whenever you go to SQL connection, right? Now this is creating object, and here we are creating some issue here. You can see here we will be creating something which we will not be able to connect. Right? Let's run this program. Now initially you can see we got an exception, and immediately it went to connection and it actually closed the connection. Now we know that it didn't even connect it to the to our SQL connection, but yes, we made sure that something we were closing our database connection. Now this will actually show you the right programming with your database. Now these are all the parameters which we will have to keep in mind while connecting. Right? So let me make it is equal to so that you can connect this. Right? Now normally whenever you have your database, right, you will also have your SQL Server Manager being installed. Now you can go to the SQL Server Manager. Let me say configuration tools and have SQL Server Manager over here. Now what I'm saying is, let's say your connection pools are filled up, right, and you are not actually getting it to run, right? Then obviously what do we do is we normally break all the connections. So how can we actually kill the connections? I mean, one way which I can show you is, let's say configuration manager, or you can also go to your services, right? You can also go to your services, right? In your services, you will actually find something called SQL Server. Right, I have many nodes, many server instances actually created. One is for 2008, and in 2008 itself I have 2 servers. In 2012 I have created 2. You can create any number of server instances in your SQL Server instances in your machine. Right, and you can see this is a server which we are using for training. Right, so you have an option to restart your server. You can either restart from your services, or you can actually start from your SQL configuration. Now this configuration manager, normally this is mainly used by database administrators, because whenever they want to maintain this, right, this is a console which they have to maintain the SQL Server actually configurations. Fine. Here also you can just right click and you have a restart option. It will actually restart your SQL Server. Now, whenever you restart your SQL Server instance, all the connections will be killed out. Right. So we have one more thing called protocols. Now make sure always your TCP IP is enabled. Otherwise, you may not be able to start connecting to your database. Sometimes, whenever you install your SQL Server, it may be disabled, and you have to select your right, instance. Now you can see MSS lib is not my instance, right? Now this is my instance, which is MSS SQL. Now here you can see my TCP IP. So that's the reason why I'm able to connect to database using my query string. Right. Now this is how we work with creating a connection string and actually getting the connection object connected to the database, right? And checking whether the database connection is correct or not, or connected or in connected state or not. Right. Now, next go to the next step. So here, this was the second step which we have seen, which is create connection. Create connection is something. Now the next thing is your create statement. Now anyways, your construct query is something which we will be building using create statement. Normally we normally create a query or build a query or a store procedure, right, integrated with your create statement. So here in create statement, right, if you remember, we said we can actually execute it in different ways, right? It can be select or update or delete or insert data, right? And these operations you can actually. And based on the different type of executions, right, which means build different type of queries you have, which performs, which returns or which actually retrieves different types of data. Like it can be rows, it can be a single, update of whether query got executed or not, or single scalar, right? Based on that, we have these few methods which are mostly used. First one is execute reader. Now this one is mainly used whenever you want to get some rows and columns data, which means you are trying to fetch some data out of your query. Then you can actually use your execute reader. And the next method we have is execute. I think for update, delete, we can use execute non-query. Right now, this is mainly for, let's say, select statement, right? Which will fetch some data. Your execute non-query is something which is mainly used for insert statement or update statements or delete statements, right? Which will give you like how many rows got affected, which is actually the number of rows got affected. Rows got affected due to this operation. Now for that you don't have to go to reader. You can directly say execute non-query, and in the data you'll actually get int output. Right, to give you how many rows or what exactly. Anyways, we'll see all these classes now. And then you have one more thing called execute scalar. Now even this is same as execute, non-query, but it actually returns the actual scalar value. Now, what is scalar value? Um, Here using your select, let's say you are trying to get a count of your rows. How many rows I do have? Like, count of rows. You can remember if you have, uh, actually any work, any programming skills in SQL Server, right? We have something called select count of star from so and so, which means how many rows does it have based on some condition, or get me the complete row count which I have in my database table, right? So these type of scalar outputs, right, we can use the execute scalar. Now even this will be, let's say in case of account, right, we can actually hold that. Uh, instance. So these are the methods which will be mostly using for a statement, right? Now, whenever I say for a statement, right, again we may be using a query or a stored procedure. I'll show you how to create a stored procedure also, and we'll also see how to actually connect to database and actually execute the SP out of database and get the results. Again, your stored procedure again can be you may have written get a data, which means you have written a select statement inside your stored procedure, or a insert or a update, which means even while actually working with SPs, based on the operation you're doing in the SP, you have to choose a right, and it is same for your query. Now today we'll see for a query, simple query, and we'll actually extend this discussion further tomorrow on actually getting more details. Right? Now, first let me create a query. Let me call it as query. Now whatever I'm going to use here, right? Let's say select star from students, right? I'm going to have to do. If you are using editor, right, then obviously you have to do a complete qualified name, right? Where you can get some data, right? Now let me use this select star from students in my. Now this is my simple query which returns multiple data which contains rows, right? So in this situation, I will have to use my SQL command. Now it comes to SQL command. What does it mean? Now your this command, which is your statement. Now for the statement, we will be using something called SQL command. Right? So in SQL command, you can give the inputs are your query. You have to give what query or SP you want to actually execute, and then very importantly, you have to mention through which connection you want to run this query. Right? Now this is very important. How we actually run the through which stream we can actually run the command. Now obviously why do we have to provide connection? Because in the same program I can have any number of connection strings and I can have any number of connection objects, right? Which means whenever you are running any command, obviously it should know which connection to use, right? So we have something called SQL command, your method. So let me call it as CMD, which is my command. Now again you can see there are a few overridden constructors. You can directly give this, or you have a sequence command text. So command text is nothing but a query, right? Or a SP or anything. So let me give URI, and then you can see the next option is your connection. Now we are already using a connection here, so I can mention my on, which is my connection object. Now this is, which is your SQL command, is ready now with the connection and a query. Now, whenever your SQL Server connection is open, right, a streaming pool will be created, right, between a database and the local machine pool, and that on that streaming pool, we are using that streaming pool to execute this code. Now, once your command is ready, now this is the time to execute it. Now, if you see here, once your statement is ready, or you can say, or command is ready, right? Now, you are good to go, which means you are good to go to execute. Now, here I will show you different execute methods. Now, you can see here there are so many execute methods. We have execute reader, right? Execute non-query, which you have seen, right? And you have something called execute scalar, the main ones, right? Let's say execute reader. Now, why do we need execute reader? Because we will be getting few rows based on this query execution. So that's the reason why I'm using execute reader. Okay. Now here you can see when I run this execute reader, right, it will actually give me some rows as I receive. Now till here is the work which you have seen for SQL command or my command and execute. Now yes, everything went fine and we are successfully got the data down. Now how to retrieve the data is a question. Now till now we have seen something where we have started a database and we have executed command, we have created a query or SP of different types and we execute it. Now you can see whenever you execute reader, now each and every method here will return certain type. Your non-query may return integer, your scalar may return integer, and your execute reader will return something called SQL data reader. Just mouse over it, you can see it returns SQL data reader, which have got capability of saving multiple rows. Right? Now this is your SQL server. Now till this part is something which is your executing your code and getting the results. Right? Now we have seen a connection string and how to connect it and check whether it is okay or not. Now if the connection state is okay, then we are actually good. Now here obviously you should do all these things only if your connection is okay. Now till this part is something where we have seen, we have created a command and we created a query and then we have seen something called executing. Selecting a right execution method inside my command. Now as it is giving me a reader, I have actually created a SQL server. Now you can see in the same way if I use non-query, right? Now if I mouse over, you can see it will give me int. And you can see the second statement, second line, executes a T-SQL statement against the connection and returns the number of rows affected. Now that is my, that we'll see. Other types of queries and everything we'll see tomorrow. Right? Now here, without any delay, let's see how we can actually process the results. If you can see, the next one is processing results, right? Now processing result is nothing but I want to read data whatever I have fetched, which is an important one again, right? And here you can see I have selected some students, right? Now to be more specific, let me say I want all the student names, right? So let me just say it as student name. Right? Select student name where I'll get all the names of students. Now obviously again this is multiple rows you are getting. Right? So let me use student name in place of star. Right? Which means multiple data will actually trigger and I'll get multiple names. Now how can I read my data from a SQL data reader? Now obviously as we are getting multiple rows, obviously we have to loop on and get each and every data, right? So this is the way how we can actually loop our data. So we'll be using while we have a reader object dot read. Now it says until reader have got rows, or until I can read data from my SQL reader, execute my loop or iterate the loop, right? And here, this is how we can actually get the data. Now let's say I'm taking a variable. Now from reader, so you have something called get methods, right? So if you can see our database, in our table, right, we have created different columns of different data types. It can be roll number is in, student name is varchar. There are so many. Now based on the data column type you have used, right, we have different methods which you can retrieve. Now as my student name is string or varchar is nothing but string, I will say it has get string of the column index you have to give, right? Which column you want to use. Let's say I want data from C. Now this is nothing but here. This is how we get data. We read data from data. Now if you have multiple columns, let's say I'm trying to get something called let's see what else we can fetch. Let's fetch roll number, because roll number seems to be integer, right? Let's fetch this roll number. So here I want my student name, and even before or after that I want my roll number, right? It's not. So here I'm looking for roll. Oops. I have my roll number. So roll number, if you give me in a second, so let me queue this roll number part here in here, right? Now in this situation I am getting two different sets of data, right? Now here let me take int now. Int, let me call it as roll number is equal to, I have a reader dot, you can see you have different get ints. Now as it is an integer, it will be 32-bit integer which I am using. I will take get int of, now you have to provide a column. Now 1 is nothing but your second column here. Now I am getting that, right? So once you have it, let's print that. Right, let's say name as we have, and we have a roll number. Right? So we're just printing the data, whatever we are trying to do. Now this is how we process data, right? Reading data from a SQL data reader, right? Where we mention the column names. Now again, column numbers start from index 0 and 1 and so on. Right? So let me run this and show you. Now you can see my connection database was successful, right? And I retrieved all the rows whatever I had. You can see Sam, roll number, Arun, and so on. Right? So this is how we normally connect. So this is a complete set of SQL programming which you can write to connect data and fetch. Right? So this will give you a complete picture on how you can actually work in database communication using our ADU objects. We have a few things to check out exclusively on command and other processing results and other injection SQL injection patterns, right? So we'll see that part in our course.